Max in the House of Spies, A Tale of World War II, is a work of historical fiction for middle-grade readers. The topic is serious, but the book is filled with humor, as Max, a Jewish boy, finds himself transported to England, where he ends up living with a family of spies. Hi, I'm Dan Skinner, and welcome to the Kids Bookshelf. Ahead, we'll explore the book, and I'll talk with the author about the inspiration behind it to see if this is a book you'd like to add to your child's library. I requested and was provided with a copy of the book, but this video is not sponsored. A bit about the author. Adam Gidwitz's previous books include the Newbery Honor-winning The Inquisitor's Tale, the A Tale of Dark and Grim trilogy, and the Unicorn Rescue Society series. He joins us to talk about his work of historical fiction for middle-grade readers. This is Max in the House of Spies, A Tale of World War II. Adam, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Adam, let's put this novel in historical perspective. So tell us about the times and also about the Kindertransport.
Yeah, I'd love to. So one of the things that's exciting to me about Max in the House of Spies, and then its sequel, which will be coming out next year, Max in the Land of Lies, is it takes place in a time period that World War II is very well known, very well written about, highly documented. But we don't actually have a ton of great stories, especially for young people, that take place in this early part of the war. You know, we've got a lot of stories about the Holocaust, which starts officially in late 1941. But this book takes place in 1938, 39, and the sequel takes place in 1940, at a time when Germany was winning the war, and before the war even started, indeed, in 1938. And so I think, creates a world which people haven't really gotten to see very well, especially young people. And I'm specifically focusing, at least in the beginning of the book, on the Kindertransport. The Kindertransport was the effort to get 10,000 Jewish children out of Nazi Germany to the UK. So throughout the 1930s, Jewish people were trying desperately to get out of Nazi Germany. And the problem was all the countries around the world were saying, we have too many Jews already, even the countries that didn't have any. And finally, in 1938, England, the UK, said, we will take 10,000 Jewish children, but not their parents. And so a very difficult choice was presented to these parents. But almost everyone who had the opportunity did take their children and put them on a train, which took them to a ferry, which took them to England. It's about a boy who is Max, who is sent to England to escape Nazi Germany. And while his parents are thrilled to get him out, he, being an only child, being the kind of kid who his parents have always relied on, doesn't want to go. He wants to stay with his parents. And we have to remember, in 1938, not only has the Holocaust not started, no one knows it's going to happen, right? So I think we currently live in a time where a lot of people on every part of the political spectrum feel like things are bad in this country. But we also probably think, well, they're not going to get much, much worse. 1938, for Jews in Germany, that's how people felt. It was bad, but they didn't think it was going to get much worse than that. So Max doesn't want to go, but his parents force him to. And he gets on a ferry, and lucky for at least us, I don't know about for Max, when he gets on the ferry to England, two immortal creatures appear on his shoulders, a dybbuk and a kobold. And their job is essentially to make his life miserable. Why they've attached themselves to him is one of the mysteries of the book. And that's when some of the fantastical and humorous parts of the book begin. And that's all in the first couple pages.
Well, tell us about these mythical characters and sort of their history within the German and Jewish, folklore.
Yeah. So there's Berg. He's a kobold. He speaks with a high German accent, and we first meet him when he wakes Max up because Max is drooling, and he's like, "You're drooling. It's disgusting." And Berg is kobolds are like goblins. Kobold is the German word for goblin. It's probably the earlier version of the word. And if you're familiar with cobalt, like the blue color, that comes from the stone cobalt, which is blue. And cobalt is called cobalt because when it's mined, it releases a poisonous gas that was making miners sick. And they blamed the kobolds for making them sick. So in fact, that blue color is named after Berg and his ilk. So their job is essentially to cause mischief. Kobolds lived in mines or they lived in houses, and they just made your life miserable. On Max's other shoulder appears Stein. Stein is a dybbuk, and in Jewish mythology, dybbuks attach themselves to you and make your life miserable. So lucky for Max, he's got them both.
And he is miserable because he's been sent away from his parents. But in the plot of this book, and as the title indicates, he ends up with a bunch of spies, and that changes the course of his life. So tell us more about that.
Yeah. So I've always wanted to write a book about the Kindertransport. When I was growing up, we had a close family friend, Michael Steinberg, who was a music critic, fairly well known in the classical music world. And he had been one of the children on the Kindertransport. And so I'd always known about that story and always wanted to write about it. But I write books for young people, and it's important to me that my books are really fun. If I'm going to do big thematic stuff, it's important also that they're turning the pages and laughing and excited. And so it wasn't until I read some wonderful books by Ben McIntyre, who is a nonfiction writer of spy books, spy histories, that I realized, this is how I can make the Kindertransport exciting and fun. And so when Max gets to England, he is placed with a family, and they are a real historical family, the Montagues. And the Montagues were high up in British intelligence. Ewan Montagu was in charge of many of the most outrageous missions in the history of spycraft, including the famous one, Operation Mincemeat, which many of your listeners may be familiar with from the wonderful book by Ben McIntyre, the movie, the forthcoming TV show. Basically, if you're not familiar with it, in short, Ewan Montagu and his partner in spycraft, Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley, took a dead body, dressed it up as a British officer, forged a letter about where the British or the Allies were going to be invading Europe from Africa, and put it in a briefcase, handcuffed the briefcase to the dead body, put the dead body in a submarine, sailed the submarine down to the southern coast of Spain, threw the dead body out into the water as the tide was going in. And that letter eventually made its way to Hitler, who changed his war plans because of what was in the letter, to the Allies' benefit. So I won't say much more than that. You should definitely read the book. It's a wonderful book, Operation Mincemeat. So those real characters, Ewan Montagu, Lieutenant Cholmondeley, figure in Max and the House of Spies, because I think it's much more fun to write historical fiction when your characters are pretty much all real people, other than Max and the kobold and the dybbuk. They're all real people, and it's fun to use those as sort of formal constraints, right? Like Ewan Montagu would only do certain things, Lieutenant Cholmondeley would do certain things, and it makes such vivid characters, at least for me in my process, to use real people.
Now, as you mentioned, there was a friend of the family who had been part of this Kindertransport. So you were aware of that at an early age. But as you did research about this, what are some of the things that surprised you about this effort in history?
Well, it was an amazing effort, the effort to get the children out of Nazi Germany. And something happy surprised me and something sad surprised me. I'll start with the sad, which is how adamant the countries around the world were in preventing Jewish and other refugees from Nazi Germany. You know, we often think of the Jewish victims of the Holocaust, and we should, but there were also many others. Disabled people were already being put to death before the Holocaust proper began. Gay, LGBTQ plus people were persecuted and ultimately murdered. Non-white people in general, Slavic people, Polish people, Russian people, none of these people fared particularly well. And everybody wanted to get out. And the surprising thing to me in my research was that Germany wanted them to leave. Hitler and Goebbels, two of the most evil and awful people in the history of the world, said to the other countries, please take the Jewish people. Now, when they were saying this, they were also going to rob the Jews blind as they left, right? If you left, there was an enormous tax. Your property was possessed. So you would, if you were a wealthy or middle-class person in Germany, you would become a poor refugee wherever you went because of the Nazi policies. But they were not only given an opportunity to leave, they were encouraged to leave. And the countries around the world shut their doors. And there millions and millions of lives were lost. Millions of people were killed because other countries around the world refused to let Jews come in. And to see the vividness of the conversations at the Evian conference, which took place in 1938 and was one of the saddest moments in history, as every country said, no, we will not accept any Jews. That was really eye-opening to read those transcripts and what transpired there. On the happy side, this effort to get these 10,000 children out of Germany was an amazing grassroots effort. Never let it be said that you, as a human individual being, can't make a difference. Margaret Mead has her famous quote, "Never doubt that a small group of committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And this was absolutely true in the Kindertransport. This was groups of Jewish people, rabbis, and other Jewish organizers, as well as non-Jews in England, including Quakers and just concerned citizens, helping to organize this massive movement of children to England and getting them placed with families. And as scary as it was for everybody, it's funny, the photos of the kids getting on those trains, they look happy. They're look like they're going away to summer camp. They don't know exactly why they're going. They don't quite understand the ramifications of it. But it was an incredible effort. And I highly encourage people, if they'd like to read more, the stories are just amazing. And if you want to read some of the verbatim stories, a book called Into the Arms of Strangers, which was also made into a documentary, are all verbatim transcripts of people who were on the Kindertransport, their memories of that time. And the stories will blow your mind, and they're easily readable for both young people and for grown-ups.
So Max is part of this Kindertransport. He goes to England, but he wants to go back to Germany, and he ends up being a spy for England back in Germany, which obviously puts him in a very unique situation.
Yes. So it's one of my rules in writing historical fiction is that everything that happens doesn't have to have really happened in history, but it needs to have been possible. It could have happened. And I only made two major exceptions in this book, and I talk about them first thing in the author's note. The first is Berg and Stein, the kobold and the dybbuk. I don't have any evidence that they could have existed. I won't say they don't, but I don't have any evidence that they did. The second is that England would have considered sending a 12-year-old Jewish boy back into Germany as a spy. That is clearly fantasy. It's clearly invented. But boy, it's fun. And I mean, it's a little scary for Max. But yes, this first volume is all about him trying to get ready, him trying to prove that he can go. And because these adults are real characters, it was important for me to find motivations for the adults to allow Max to go that are believable. And so it won't be entirely clear until the second volume why Ewan Montague would let his ward, Max, go back to Germany. But he has a reason that I think you will find surprising and a little bit heartbreaking and a little bit and believable. And so the second volume will be all about Max in Germany, dealing with everything that a clandestine agent who happens to be 12 years old and then 13 has to deal with in Nazi Germany.
As you point out, this is prior to the Holocaust, but things are getting bad for the Jewish population. So this is serious subject matter here in World War II, but as you pointed out, there's a lot of humor in this book because you are dealing with kids and it's just how you want to tell this story. But I wanted to ask you a little bit about why it was so important to make sure this story has a lot of humor and the role of humor as you face such horrific details in our history.
That's a great question. I am a former teacher, I taught first grade, second grade, fifth grade, and high school. I never taught middle school because kids scare me. But many of my books are for middle schoolers anyway. And I learned very early on that you have to engage the kids first and foremost. That is your number one goal. And when I write a book, my number one goal is to keep kids turning the pages, turning them joyfully with excitement, laughing. Because no matter how ambitious my goals are in a book, and my goals in this book are indeed quite ambitious, there is no purpose embarking on ambitious goals if kids aren't going to read the words on the pages. I don't do this for myself. I do this for the kids. And that is ultimately for myself. But if the kids aren't getting something out of it, then I am wasting my time. So Max and the House of Spies is first and foremost an adventure novel, a spy novel, a funny novel. So it should definitely make you laugh. There should be many, many chapters in the book where you're like, wait, why is Max doing this? And then as you get to the end, you're like, no. And then he pulls it off, whatever it is. And you're like, oh my gosh, he's a genius. Like that should be the primary feeling in this book. And then if there's a passage that makes you think a little bit more deeply or question some things you thought you understood, then I'll have completely achieved my goal. First, entertaining and making you enjoy yourself, and then maybe challenging you a little bit and making you think after that.
Adam, there's a question that I like to ask authors of fiction, and it's this. If you could spend a day in real life with one of the characters from your novel, who would it be and why?
There are so many characters in this book I would like to choose from. Two characters that I would not choose are Stein and Berg, because their job would be to make me miserable and they would just heckle me and make me feel bad about myself. Probably the character that would be the most fun for a single day is Lieutenant Charles Chumley. He was a real-life spy master in England. He was nearly 7 feet tall. He had ridiculous waxed handlebar mustache and little glasses. He's the kind of spy who could never have fit in anywhere. Unless he's trying to be clandestine in a circus, he would never fit in. And yet he was a brilliant master of the clandestine, and I think he would just be a hilarious character to hang out with. Our last known photograph of Lieutenant Charles Chumley, Lieutenant, as he would have said, is dressed as a Bedouin in 1955, supposedly on a mission in Arabia studying wasps. I don't believe that for a second. He was certainly on some sort of spy mission there, but no one knows what happened to him, at least as far as I'm sure, as far as I can tell. So it's quite possible that Lieutenant Charles Chumley is still out there wandering the world, dressed in some outrageous costume. So if you see somebody 7 feet tall with crazy waxed handlebar mustache acting suspiciously, it's probably him.
And before I let you go, I wanted to give you the opportunity to tell us about your podcast and how that grew out of a couple of other books, or actually a trio of books that you wrote.
Yeah, so my first book was called A Tale Dark and Grim, and in it I use the original real grim fairy tales, again back to German folklore, and weave them into a novel. And that came out of me being a teacher telling fairy tales live to kids, and the reactions that I got from them. One day I was supposed to be a substitute librarian, and they asked me if I'd be willing to tell the kids a story, and I said sure. And I went home and I was looking around on my shelf for a good book to read to these kids, and I came across my book of the real grim fairy tales. And I had never read the book, but I looked at it and I thought, oh, fairy tales. Those are perfect for second graders. And I opened it up to a story called Faithful Johannes. And in the story Faithful Johannes, 2 children get decapitated. They get their heads put back on, so they're fine. But I read that and I was like, oh my goodness, can I read this to second graders? Will I get fired? And then I thought, let's find out. So I read it to the kids, and as I went, I made jokes and I tried to warn them and calm them down. And they, at the end of the story, were like jumping up and screaming. And this little girl came up to me, and I'll never forget it because it changed my life. She stuck her finger in my face and she said, "That was good." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "You should make that into a book." And so I did. So the first chapter of A Tale Dark and Grim is literally that story I told them pretty much verbatim. Yes, kids get their heads cut off, but I promise they get put back on and they'll be fine. So it's definitely, a bit scary, but mostly funny. And so as I traveled around the country promoting those books, A Tale Dark and Grim and its 2 sequels, I told fairy tales. And I was realizing that the fairy tales were great, but the best part was what the kids would say in reaction to my fairy tales. They asked questions, they would say hilarious things, and no one was getting to hear that except for me. And so when podcasting became more of a mainstream thing, a podcasting company approached me and said, "Do you have an idea for a podcast?" And I said, "Yes, I want people not only to hear all the real grim fairy tales, the funny, the weird, the sometimes bloody. I want people to hear what the kids are saying about them." So Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest is my podcast. And it's called that because we rate each episode Grim, Grimmer, or Grimmest. And you get to hear the kids laugh. You get to hear them scream occasionally. And then you also get to hear them heckle me. So, for example, in one of the early episodes, the main character encounters a blue dwarf in the forest. And I introduce this blue dwarf, and this girl interrupts me, and she says, "You mean a Smurf?" And I'm like, no, it's a blue dwarf. And she said, "I'm pretty sure that's a Smurf." And I was like, "It's not a Smurf." But then for the rest of the podcast, every time the blue dwarf comes up, the kids go, "It's a Smurf." And I'm like, "It's not a Smurf." So anyway, the podcast is a real joy. We've got 40 episodes now, Grim, Grimmer, Grimmest. So it's good for family listening, long road trips. I recommend it. Yeah.
The book is Max in the House of Spies, A Tale of World War II by Adam Gidwitz. Adam, thank you for talking with me today.
It was such a pleasure and an honor to be interviewed by you. Thank you.
If you'd like to purchase Max in the House of Spies, I've placed a link for you in the description below. Thank you for watching this edition of the Kids Bookshelf. And if you'd like to see more videos about children's books and their authors, be sure to subscribe, like, and click on the bell to be notified about future programs. And if you're interested in books for young adult and older readers, be sure to check out my Some Books Considered channel, and there's a link to that in the description as well. I'm Dan Skinner. Until next time, keep sharing the gift of reading.